Welcome to the Real Paranormal Stories podcast with your host, Christopher Buckner. Send your stories to realparanormalstoriespodcast@gmail.com. Royalty-free music provided by Kevin MacLeod and Tabletop Audio. And now, let's take a trip into the paranormal. This story comes from Rob from Milford, New Hampshire. And this is his story. I was 11 or 12 years old. My parents had a vacation home in Maine. It was in the small, sleepy fisherman town of South Thomaston, Maine, which was the Penobscot Mikmaq tribe area in the days before. The neighbors up the street about 1,000 feet were the Kirks. They lived in a mobile home and had tons of apple trees on their property. My family had a bulldozer up there to work our property one summer. Mr. Kirk had mentioned he wanted to make a pond in the backyard at his property. My father lent him the bulldozer. Mr. Kirk blazed a path through the woods and didn't think twice about pushing aside a random pile of rocks in the woods. He was going about his business as usual, going back and forth with the dozer making the pond, when the water started filling in and turned the pond to mud. The dozer got stuck. My father went over and pulled the dozer out, did the needed repairs, and brought it back to our property. Nothing was thought of this event. This all happened in the months just after winter. Towards fall is apple harvest season, and the family, meaning family, friends, and anyone in the neighborhood, had their yearly apple cider pressing party. It was an event where everyone took turns drinking beer, sharing life, and turning the crank on the cider press. Mrs. Kirk would walk around capturing the memories on film and making merry. The fresh roadway to the new pond was still damp from being made. A few weeks later, we were up there again over at the Kirks and looking at all the pictures. This was 35mm camera prints from a local Kodak store. In some of the pictures, there was a light haze way in the background. It was very hard to notice on the prints, but using a magnifying glass on the negatives, you could see an octagonal bubble in a few of them. In the bubbles, there was a Mikmaq man and woman, a man, woman, and child, and a man and a wolf-like dog. They were standing watching the apple festivities with what looked like approval. You could always feel the presence at the Kirks until Mr. Kirk put the stone piles back where they belonged, and had a descendant come and bless the area so the spirits would go back to rest. At my house up there, I had many nights of dreams that were influenced by the pictures and the disturbed spirits until they were put back to peace. And that is Rob's story. This story comes from Jess from Australia. And this is her story. When I was about 15 to 17 years old, I was in bed on my phone listening to music when I heard footsteps coming down the hallway. I thought it was my dad and freaked out because I was meant to be asleep and not on my phone. I tried to turn off the music and hide my phone under the covers, but I couldn't turn it off in time, and I heard my dad's footsteps come up to the end of my bed and stop. I pretended to be asleep, and then when my dad didn't say anything, I turned on my phone light and peeked over the covers to see if he was gone. Instead of seeing my dad at the end of my bed, I see this tall man with dark brown hair and a gray blanket wrapped around his shoulders. He looks like he's been caught in the rain. He's drenched, and he's staring directly above my bed, looking distant. I try to call out to my dad, but I'm laying at a weird angle and I'm kind of whisper screaming at this point. And he reached his hand out and grabbed the top of my foot over the covers. I can move my toes, but I can't pull my foot away, and I'm hyperventilating now. At this point, I'm shaking. I'm so scared. I lay back and take a deep breath, and I peek back over the covers, and he's gone. I turn on the light under my bed head and call my friend, super freaked out. They say maybe I had my first experience of sleep paralysis and suggest I try to sleep and take my mind off of it. I decide to sleep with the bed light on. I wake up and it's off. I asked my dad if he turned it off or the power tripped, but he said no. But the only way to turn off the light is to reach underneath the bed head to flick it off or turn it off at the wall, and I don't remember turning it off. I then realized that where the guy was looking was where I had placed a dream catcher. Weird coincidence, but I had gotten it the day before, and it wasn't straight, and I hadn't felt right about it not being straight. So I fixed it, and I've never seen him again. I also started sleeping on the other side of my bed because screw that. Initially, I thought maybe I had sleep paralysis. I'd never had it before though. But I could move my body and my toes. I wasn't pinned. I thought maybe it was a dream, but I could feel his hand on my foot. My music had played continuously. Didn't change at all from me taking a deep breath and him being gone. This wasn't my first scary experience, and it wasn't my last. And that is Jess's story. That's all for this episode of the Real Paranormal Stories podcast. If you liked what you heard, please leave us a review anywhere this podcast can be found.